Welcome, everyone. I have 12:01, so let's go ahead and get started today. Thank you for joining us. I hope you are dry and warm and preparing for the potential for weather coming in tomorrow. We're very lucky today. We have Melissa Agnes, the founder and CEO of Crisis Ready Institute. She's going to talk to us today. As I mentioned in my reminder email, this is more of a conversation, not a monologue. So feel free to turn your cameras on. Feel free to ask questions when questions come up. If you don't want to ask them, you may put them in chat. I will be monitoring chat throughout the day. So you are all aware, probably, unless this is your first time, I do this webinar series. If you have any suggestions for topics or speakers or any comments on how I could make this a better experience for you, I'm always willing to listen. Shoot me an email and I will do everything I can. As I mentioned, Melissa would like this to be a conversation, not a monologue. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them yourself. If not, you can put them in the chat. Reminder, we are giving out certificates of attendance, KYEM is. So at the end of this webinar, I will give you a link and a QR code. If you fill out the short survey, KYEM will send you a certificate. And I'll have a recording of this out probably late week, early next week at the latest. So today's objectives. So in communities with limited resources and evolving emergency structures, PIOs face the critical challenge of preparing elected officials who may lack crisis training and time. In this interactive session, Melissa Agnes explores the invisible resistance that hinders effective communication in high-stakes moments, from leaders reluctant to train to those unprepared to meet their communities with empathy and clarity in moments of crisis. Together, we'll examine what it takes to build readiness in your culture, even when time is tight and buy-in is elusive. So our featured presenter today is, as I've mentioned, Melissa Agnes. She's the founder and CEO of Crisis Ready Institute. She's recognized globally as an expert thought leader and visionary in the field of crisis management. Melissa has worked with global players, NATO, the Pentagon, healthcare organizations, cities, municipalities, law enforcement agencies. In 2020, Melissa founded Crisis Ready Institute, a public benefit corporate dedicated to creating a crisis-ready, crisis-resilient world by elevating industry standards, by providing training and certification programs to professionals that better protect people, brands, the environment, and the economy in time of crisis, and by promoting and incentivizing organizations and leaders to invest in effective crisis readiness. Her book, Crisis Ready: Building an Invisible Brand in an Uncertain World, is taught in dozens of universities around the world, including at Harvard University, is ranked among the leading crisis management books of all time by Book Authority, and was named one of the top 10 business books of 2018 by Forbes. Melissa is the creator of the Crisis Ready model, which is recognized and being taught as leading industry best practice in the fields of crisis management and crisis communication. In 2019, Melissa founded the Crisis Ready Community, a space for professionals to come together to support one another, collaborate, and strengthen their crisis ready skills. Born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, Melissa currently lives in New York City and enjoys traveling, rollerblading, sailing, and working out when she isn't working. So if you would all help me give a round of applause to Melissa, I am going to stop my share and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for doing this, Melissa. I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, thanks for those hands, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, and thank you for putting on your camera. So I am gifting my time today, and I want to gift you as much value that is practical and applicable to you in this moment in time as I possibly can. So in return, I do ask that you be present, that you engage, and that you utilize this time to your advantage. I'll kick things off by sharing a little bit about, what the topic of today is. But then from there, I really want this to be your time. Like I said, like I am here for you. And so as much as I can give you, that is my intention. If there's anything that we talk about that you're like, I want to double click into that, I want to learn that skill, or I want to learn more about that, reach out to me afterwards. We have programs for all of this stuff that goes so deep, depending on the level of skills and like expertise that you want to strengthen. So that's just always available to you. Okay, so the thing about this, let me grab it. The thing about this, the description for today that really I love is we're going to explore the invisible resistance that hinders effective communication in high stakes moments. Because you guys are on screen, which I appreciate, show of hands of like who feels that invisible resistance in crisis comms, right? Yes, thank you. It's such a through line. It's such this frustrating, forever challenge in the field of crisis comms and just high stakes communication in general. And I've been doing this a long time, longer than I look. And I remember about 12, 15 years ago, I really started to ask myself, like just really get curious about why is it that leaders and organizations are so resistant to something that is so valuable, is so connection driven, is so like just provides so much benefit and so much value, and in the best and worst of cases saves lives, right? And why is there this constant resistance to either becoming crisis ready ahead of a crisis or really like rising to the challenge of crisis comms and true crisis leadership? For me, comms and leadership synonymous. If you're a leader, you have to be able to communicate. If you're a communicator, I'm going to always vouch for you that you are a leader. And so I kind of interchange those words when I speak. But why is there so much resistance? And so I really got curious about this. I kind of have been curious about this aspect of human nature for a very long time. And around 10 years ago, I really identified what I began to call the 5 crisis-ready hindrances. Today, those have evolved significantly, but I kind of would love to take you on the journey because I think that there's a lot of value in seeing the 5 and then really understanding more deeply the 2 or 3 that are actually true. You guys with me? At any point in time, feel free to come off mute and just ask me a question or chime in. Like I said, this is meant to be a conversation to give you as much as I possibly can. So the 5 crisis-ready hindrances, as I learned and experienced them, were, in no order of importance here, but avoidance, ego, fear, politics, and ignorance. The first 4, ego, avoidance, fear, and politics, we're going to bucket those as like one category, and then we're going to take ignorance as the second category. So I'm going to take you on this journey. Again, interrupt me, let's have a conversation, but I'm going to take you on this journey of what I mean by all of this and why. I think that when we understand the deeper why of human nature and the resistance that you guys are met with consistently and will always be unfortunately met with, the more you can open perspective, shift perspective, and meet that resistance the way that it's asking to be met so that you can gain ultimately more buy-in and support for the incredibly important roles that you have on your shoulders. So that's my purpose here. So we're going to start with ego, because in that bucket category 1 of ego, fear, avoidance, and politics, ignorance being on bucket 2, ego is at the root of it. When I talk about ego, a lot of people kind of recoil often. I'm never talking about arrogance or narcissism or pride. I am literally talking about the human aspect, or the aspect of our human that is our self-identity. So I am Melissa Agnes, right? I'm a blonde, I'm 5'10", I have these passions and these dislikes and these insecurities and these whatever, and all of that creates my identity of who I see myself as being, or moreover, who I choose to be, who I am on purpose. And that goes into my ego, which is Melissa Agnes, right? So my ego, your ego, we all have an ego. We can't be a human without our egos, creates this sense of individuality. It says that I am Melissa Agnes and you are you, and that we are separate, we are different, right? Even though everything from neuroscience to quantum physics to sociology to all of these different types of sciences tell us that we are all actually interconnected. Our ego is the ability, or gives us the ability, to experience our life through our lens as an individual, which is such a beautiful thing. The ego's job, partly, is to keep the individual alive. Right? So my ego wants to make sure that me, Melissa Agnes, that I stay healthy and well and alive so that I can experience life. Yeah? What the ego can't do, it's not super intelligent, what it can't do is discern between an experience that might actually bring me harm and therefore potentially not keep me alive versus an experience that is simply uncomfortable because it's new. To the ego itself, it can't discern between those two things. So it doesn't discern between, keeping you safe from running into a burning building if you're not a firefighter, versus trying something new that actually might be the most expansive, opportunistic thing that you ever do in your entire life that's going to change your world for the better. If that thing is new, which it is, the ego is still likely going to go, Yet that may be better, that may change my world for the better, but right now I can discern that I am keeping Melissa Agnes alive. So it's going to create some resistance towards that something new because it can't discern between the two. You're with me? So ego being a hindrance. When does ego get in the way? Ego gets in the way as a hindrance. It becomes a crisis-ready hindrance when it says that something new is scary. What is scary? Crisis communication and crisis leadership is scary. People don't like to use the word scary, but we're going to use it. It is intimidating, it is vulnerable, it is scary. It is scary as a human being to have to stand up in front of a community that might be grieving or that might be in fear or that might be enraged, and to expose yourself and to create connection, which is the goal in crisis comms and crisis leadership, in a way that meets the emotionality and brings people towards resolve, towards safety, towards relief, etc. That is a scary thing for the ego to do. So instantaneously and very normally, as being a human being, that's going to create resistance. Now that resistance often gets triggered in the form of fear, because what did the ego do back in the day when we had to run and hide from saber-toothed tigers? Was create fear to go fight, flight, freeze and save our lives. So we have been more in fear as a human being, as species. We've spent more of our existence in survival mode, which is what fear is, in survival mode, than we have in what I would call creation mode. So we are so innately wired in our remembrance of our being, of our generational, existence, to run, fight, flight, freeze. That's fear. What we know, the science of fear, okay, there's lots of research on this stuff. So the science of fear tells us, Brene Brown, do I have the book with me? I don't. Brene Brown has this amazing book called Atlas of the Heart. You guys familiar? Anybody familiar with it? As a communicator, as a PIO, I highly recommend this book as a resource. One thing I'll share later is that every emotion has a need that's longing to be met. True or false that in crisis is filled with emotion? Mostly, crisis is filled with fear-based emotions. Every fear-based emotion has a need longing to be met. It is the communicator and the leader's responsibility to understand what those needs are and to do our best to create safety and to meet those needs. And that's how we create connection through resistance, through fear, through those fear-based emotionalities. I don't have the book next to me, I usually do, but that book is just a lexicon of emotion. So it's a wealth of knowledge that can be specifically applied to your roles. In that book, this is where I was going, fear. Fear is, as per Brene Brown's definition, fear is a negative, short-lasting, high-alert emotion in response to a perceived threat. And like anxiety, it can be measured as a state or a trait. State or a trait means that some people are more prone to being in fear or triggered by fear versus some people they're less prone, it's really just situational. That aside, it's saying that it's a short-lasting, high-alert emotion in response to a perceived threat. Perceived threat doesn't mean it has to be real, right? The burning building versus that opportunity that's new, both can be a perceived threat to the ego, both can create fear. The science also tells us that, or the research also says that fear is such a rapid fire emotion that quite often the physiological reaction of fear can occur before the person even realizes they're afraid. I like to look around the world. I play this game with myself, and I look at decisions being made by leaders, especially in times of crisis, or that could be crisis preventative. And I would like to play the game with myself of, is that person, is that leader making a decision right now based on fear without even being aware of it? Quite often, my answer when I play this game with myself is most probably yes. Because we haven't been taught this stuff in general growing up. And so what we know about fear is that it's so fast acting to keep us alive that what it does, it floods our body with cortisol and adrenaline, which is stress, right? Cortisol is addictive, but when we're flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, our prefrontal cortex shuts down. You guys know what the prefrontal cortex gives us? Access to creative thinking, access to innovative thinking, access to clear decision making. It is our executive functions, right? So in a crisis, what do we want access to? Creative thinking, innovative problem solving. But if we're in a state of fear, especially if we're in a state of unconscious fear, then we don't have access to that, which is the game that I like to play with myself around, like, who's in fear without even realizing it, and are they making a fear-based decision? We see fear-based decisions being made all the time, especially in times of crisis. So ego, I've explained what that is and its function in this context, and then it triggers the fear, which shut down the prefrontal cortex. Ego and fear are crisis-ready hindrances that most people aren't even aware of, that is hindering their ability to lean in and communicate effectively and lead effectively in times of crisis. The other two that came from that were avoidance and politics. The shift that I've had, avoidance is a tactic of, it's a coping mechanism for anxiety that is not benign. So avoidance is something that we tell ourselves that if we don't look at it, it's not going to hurt us, right? So we avoid doing the right thing, or we avoid communicating, or really stepping into the emotionality and meeting people where they're at and being able to create those connections in those hard moments as leaders in communication in crisis. So avoidance is a coping mechanism that is not benign. It is definitely harmful. And so therefore a hindrance, but it comes from the ego and the fear. And then politics is really looking at that, for lack of a better way of saying this, when I'm talking about politics as a crisis-ready hindrance, I'm looking at the illusion that we're all separate, which what comes from the ego, our individuality, right? I said it earlier, it gives us a sense that we are individual, that you and I are not the same. Science, all the sciences show us that that is in fact not true, but the ego believes that it is because it's here to allow us to have individual life experiences. So when we subscribe to the illusion of separateness, we forget that we're all connected. And when we subscribe to the illusion of separateness, we believe in, or we choose to have, whether it's willful or ignorance, we choose to have the mindset of scarcity. And scarcity says that there's not enough. And scarcity says that in order for me to win, because there's not enough, everybody else has to lose. And that's where politics comes in the context of what I'm talking about today. But both avoidance and politics in this context come from ego that activates the fear to keep us alive, because crisis communication and crisis leadership is very vulnerable, and that activates that sense of needing to self-preserve and self-protect. Are you guys?
Melissa, I got a couple questions in the chat. So Marilyn asks, I believe she meant to say, how do you get through to people who are in avoidance?
That's where we're going with this.
I figured that's where you were. And then Ryan asks, could we think of politics as power dynamics or no?
I definitely power dynamics. I always revert. Okay. Guys, thank you for these questions. We're getting, so for Marilyn's question, we're going to get there. That is exactly where I want to take you today. And I love the conversational aspect. And then Ryan, power dynamics. Yeah. So power dynamics, one thing that we teach at Crisis Ready is control. So power dynamics, power over, right? Where's Ryan? I want to make sure I'm looking at you. There you are. Hi. Power over, right? that's wanting to have control. Yeah? Can we kind of agree with that? And feel free to push back, guys. Like, don't just take my word for it. Let's talk it through. So power over, wanting control. Control is a tool of fear. The only reason you want control is because something in your nervous system feels like it's like grasping, it's lacking, it's seeking, because it feels like it's losing control, it's losing power, whatever you want to call it. So control is an illusion. The only thing that we actually have control over when we learn to, and we haven't been taught this historically as a society, as a collective, are our thoughts, and therefore our emotions, and therefore we actually create our reality from those things. Most people don't know that. Most people see control as a sense of feeling safe. And so when the nervous system is dysregulated, which when we're in survival mode or fear, or feel like we need to self-preserve or self-protect, then we're going to be in dysregulation, and there's going to be this grasping for control, which leads to the power over. So yes, I would say that we can put that in the bucket of politics, because that goes to separateness and scarcity. Does that make sense? But it all comes back down, control, if we're looking at that in the context of politics, comes back down to fear, which comes back down to the ego. And the ego, this isn't a big bad thing. What people do with this, out of a lack of awareness and skill, it can be big and bad. But this, in simplistic form, this is just our humaning. And it's served us well for so long. We're just in an era now, I truly believe, that we don't need to be in survival mode anymore. We can be in creation. And we can't be in survival and creation at the same time. So in creation is when you have access to your prefrontal cortex. In survival is when that shuts down, your body gets filled with adrenaline and cortisol and all the things, and you're not in your most optimal position to be leading, especially through moments of high intensity and crisis. So we can't be in both, because you can't have access and not have access to your prefrontal cortex at the same time. So we have to choose. And in order to choose, we have to better understand where the root of all of this comes from, and not look at it in a way that we're guilting or we're shaming or we're blaming. It just is because we're human, and now we can learn differently. We can choose differently. The other one, and I'll just say it quickly, the other bucket was ignorance. Ignorance, typically speaking, theoretically speaking, can be the simplistic hindrance to overcome, the most simplistic hindrance to overcome, because ignorance is just a lack of information. How many leaders just don't know how to communicate in times of crisis? Because they haven't been taught. They've been taught how to lead when when the sun is shining, not when the natural disaster is happening, or worse. So ignorance can be met with, I'm going to say, loving, compassionate education. Because if it's not met with loving, compassionate education, it very highly risks triggering the fear and the ego side of the hindrances, and those are harder to overcome. Does that make sense to you? Because all of this, the work that you guys do, is not easy. Easy would be the understatement of a lifetime, and is extremely vulnerable. And that triggers the self-preservation. So in my work, what I love to do, what I'm super passionate about, is safety comes from within. So as the leader, as the communicator, it's understanding these dynamics of human behavior, understanding them first and foremost within yourself, because you are human too. So therefore you are susceptible and vulnerable to all of these hindrances. Raise your hand if you feel comfortable, if you know what fear feels like in your body. Yeah, Marilyn says yeah, a few hands. Is it a sensation in your body? Jay says yes. Is it a sensation? It's sensation. Is it a voice? Anybody experiencing in the form of a voice?
I'd say it's more of thoughts that come through, and then from the thoughts, it's more like a domino effect. So the thought comes through whatever I'm perceiving, and then from the thought, the feeling, and then the feeling emotion, and then the physical, goosebumps, or that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's absolutely right, because our thoughts create our emotions create our frequency. And when we get into moments of fear, fear doesn't actually exist in the body. Fear exists in the body. Let me rephrase that. Fear exists in the body to make us run, to give us the adrenaline we need to run from the saber-toothed tiger. But the idea that we need to run from the saber-toothed tiger occurred in the brain. Fear originates, to your point, Belle, in the brain. For me personally, I've come to learn that I could be like this. I could be in a perfect state, a seemingly perfect state of like optimal self. And all of a sudden right here, I will hear a voice start rattling off the what ifs, the risks, the hypervigilance. And I've trained myself that I could feel great. But the second that voice comes online, that's my self-check of, oh, there's fear happening. Because what do we know about the science? Marilyn, I'll ask you in 1 second. What do we know about the science? We know that fear happens. It's so fast acting that it usually takes over and the leader doesn't actually realize it. So it's our job within ourselves, because we're susceptible to these hindrances, to start to understand what that feels like in our body. And then the later steps is really creating the safety in your body so that you can show up in coherence, which is in regulated nervous system, even in the most trying, vulnerable, scary of moments in your career or in your life. And that is possible. That is a skill set that we have access to. Marilyn, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm identifying 3 situations where I've experienced fear. One is when there's really danger, right? Physical danger or whatever in front of me, and I don't see it yet, but I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's don't go there.
Yep.
You know. Then another one is like when I think about Minnesota, and I think about what if I'm in that situation, and then my thoughts start talking to me and go, well, what I do, what is that all about? And then that would be another one. And then the next one would be if I'm the PIO and it's Minnesota happening around me, where do I go? What do I do? That's like a whole nother level of fear.
Because the responsibility is higher, right? It's not just you anymore. Now it's your community that you're leading. And that first one that you said, so I wasn't going to go here with you, but I will now. And so tell me where you guys want to go. And we will still come back to the question of like, how do you meet people in their resistance? Because that's going to serve you. But what you're talking about in that, like, you look down a dark alley and there's something that's like, don't go there, before your thoughts, or maybe you don't even realize there's a dark alley and all of a sudden your spidey sense turns on. You're like, oh, you're now hyper vigilant, right? We actually have 3, do you guys know this? We have 3 brains. We don't just have one. So we have, science shows us, we have 3 intelligence centers. We have the brain, we have the heart brain, and we have the gut brain. And now we have the technology that allows us to measure these things. So I'm gonna muff my numbers up a little bit. If memory serves, I might be off a little bit. There's about 40,000 neurons in the heart that the heart actually thinks and feels. The heart also, because quantum physics shows us that we're made from subatomic particles, which are both matter and energy at the same time. So everything is energy, right? We are both energy and matter at the same time. The 6th sense is not woo-woo. It's actually a part of our innate being. And the heart center has an electromagnetic field that we can measure with technology that actually, when we are in coherence, which heart-brain coherence, when we're in nervous system regulation, for lack of a better way of saying that, our heart's electromagnetic field expands several feet beyond our physical body's border. And this electromagnetic field is both a receiver of information and a transmission of information. So have you ever walked into a room in this context? Have you ever walked into a room and the music's playing and people are drinking and having a good time, but you walk in and you're like, whoa, something just happened. But your eyes are like, nothing's happened. Your brain's like, there's nothing to see here, but there's something, you're like, no, something just happened, right? Because energy, we are in energy, we are energy, we come from energy. Energy is around us all the time, and energy is frequency, which carries information. Our heart's electromagnetic field takes in that information. Our gut brain actually has over 500 million neurons. So the gut brain is actually referred to as our second brain. It can do way more than just think and feel, and it's also a receptor of information. And then the vagus nerve, our longest, biggest cranial nerve, connects from the back of our brain down our body and it connects these three centers. And that's how information travels. So your gut instincts or your intuition are not this magical thing. They're actually scientifically proven to be part of your intelligence centers. And our brain, I'm going to come back full circle here in a second, but our brain was never actually meant to be the sole thinker, the sole thing that we use to think with. The brain is actually meant to be a processor. And the vagus nerve that carries the information, that connects these three intelligence centers and carries the information, science shows us that 90% of the information that travels through the vagus nerve travels upstream. Most people, because we've been raised and trained in a society that has put all of the value on the brain and our intellect, which isn't wrong, it's just incomplete, means that the majority of the people walking around are cut off from the neck down, which means that 90% of the information that travels upstream. And so they're cut off from the neck up, and fear, this is where fear lives, because this is where our thoughts live. And our fear comes from our thoughts, as Belle pointed out. And what you're talking about, Marilyn, is having access to those other intelligence centers, which offers us like infinite wisdom and infinite like foresight and insight. Right now we're going through a shift in the world where everything is changing. And in my experience, I sit at some really interesting leadership tables, and leaders tend to look for leaders and tend to look externally for answers to questions that nobody has answers to yet, because we're in the midst of this shift. We're in unprecedented times. The answers actually exist in our body when we know how to tap in and listen, because then that information comes in and travels up. Coming back full circle before I let you speak, Belle, is I talked about fear existing in the brain and the hindrances. So no, I'll leave it there. I'll ask Belle, and then we'll talk about how to meet people in it. And bring on your questions, guys, because I know I'm giving you a lot, and I know I'm talking really fast. So we could dive into all of this. Go ahead, Belle.
But
You're
I
on
think
mute.
we're all keeping up. I do want to
Thank you.
say this though, you're giving so much really helpful information that can be used in terms of communication tools when I'm creating internal messaging, for the department and the agencies here. I was trying to write everything because you were giving literally every sentence you gave was something I've either heard before or I've seen through, lived experiences. But one thing that stood out in particular, you said everything is energy, and then you mentioned the three different types of intel centers, I guess, for the brain. So the brain, gut, etc. And it made me think, not to throw you off track too much, Melissa, but it made me remember this study that someone told me about that happened years and years ago. And it was all about how everything is energy and how things don't just work from a brain level, but on a much intrinsic, like on a much, maybe I wouldn't go so far as say spiritual, but less than physical sort of perspective. And in this study, there was 2 vats of rice. And I guess in the study, the scientists, it was a group of scientists, I don't know if it was from Japan or from Russia, but they put 1 vat of the rice in one room. And they put another vat of the same exact rice, uncooked rice, in another room. And in the first room, the scientists went into that room and they started speaking to the rice, having positive dialogue, positive reinforcements, physically saying positive affirmations to the rice, okay? And then in the second room, the same type of rice, same amount, same size, but in that room, the scientists were just very nasty, had nasty intentions in their minds. They said nasty things, how the rice is, unattractive and all these really negative things. And at the end of the study, they compared the rices, and believe it or not, the rice that was in the first room, according to the study that was told to me, the rice was still cookable. It was quite fragrant and it was edible and what have you. But then at the ending of the study, the second vat of rice that had all of these negative affirmations that were given to it and all these feelings of fear and these horrible, heavy bass music that was being played in that room, that rice started to mold. It had actual black mold on it and it was quite inedible. And so it's just funny that study popped into my mind because it's exactly as you're pointing out to everyone how it's not just what our brain sees, but it's so much more. It's different levels of awareness and how it affects things. Everything is energy. So sorry, hopefully I didn't throw everyone off, but as you were talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've heard this before, I've seen it before, and this is really, really relevant in today's time because a lot of the times we deal with things from a brain sort of standpoint, from a very physical, aggressive standpoint, when in fact we should be using our other intel centers that you spoke about, gut and feeling and et cetera, et cetera. So that's it. That's all I've got.
No,
Sorry.
thank you for that. And to Marilyn's point, those studies have been done with plants, and there's so much research. So like I could point to you to so many different studies and books and researchers and scientists that have proven all of this stuff or looked at it from different lenses. And what else I do want to look at your questions too. What I'll say too is your point. I think it was Marilyn who said, hold on, sorry, I'm losing my mouse. So part of our role as PIO is to bring positive energy. So fear-based, we can understand we're fear-based emotions. So there's no such thing, from my lens, there's no such thing as negative and positive emotions. There are negative outputs of what we do with our emotions, and there are positive outputs of what we choose to do with our emotions, but emotion itself just is. Emotion is energy in motion. So it's a chemical process that happens in our body, and it's an energetic wave that moves through us. And I'm just sharing like what I know to be true, what I believe, what I know to be true, what I've observed and experienced and explored with, and all the different things. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, if you guys aren't familiar with his work, he's phenomenal at really showing this stuff. He works with Heart Math Institute, and he does the science and the research behind all of these things that we're talking about, or a lot of these things that we're talking about. Anyways, there's only actually two emotions in our world. There's fear-based emotionality and there's love-based emotionality. And there was a scientist, his name is not coming to mind, but he wrote Power versus Force decades ago. It's a really good book. And in it, he really measured the different emotions in terms of frequency. So if emotion is energy in motion, energy is frequency, carries information, and it is frequency, right? So it's like a radio. You turn the knob and you go to a different frequency and you get a different signal. You get a different station, whatever it might be. So fear-based emotions and love-based emotions, and fear is the lowest frequency emotion and love is the highest. So by default, right there, low versus high rules, high wins. Love will always overcome fear, always. It might take a minute, but it always will. We can't fight, so going back to your rules, we can't fight fear with fear. There's a lot of fear in the world right now. There's a lot of fear in this country right now on so many different levels. And most people haven't been taught how to process through their emotionality effectively, so that fear stays stagnant, and unfortunately that fear then cycles and creates more fear. And this is the comment to the positive, like your rules as PIO to be positive, it's to remember that connection is the goal. Every single human being is wired for connection. Everything about our bodies and our being is craving connection. We get into lower frequency, so I don't say negative or positive emotion. I say fear-based emotion, love-based emotion, or low-frequency emotion, a high-frequency emotion. That's my terminology. So where was I going? Sorry. Emotionality. You can't beat emotion with logic. Oh, guys, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Your role, I was onto something, is to understand that the fear, that's where I was. Our bodies are wired for connection. Everybody is craving connection. When we are in fear-based emotions, when we're in low-frequency emotions, that's when we really trigger our ego. And our ego believes that we're separate. So have you ever been really like mad or upset and you just really just like wanted to retract and be on your own and like brew in that? Anybody relate to feeling like that? I have a girlfriend who's like, so you're saying that when I'm mad at my husband, I don't have to be, like I can move out of that, but what if I want to be? That's a thing, right? We're human. Sometimes feeling mad or feeling whatever like feels so good, or we just feel we want to isolate. And then, and I can say this from experience, like with my fiance, there's sometimes where I'm a little pissed off and I want to retract but I know I can remind myself that if I lean into connection, as good as it might feel right now to like be angry or whatever it is, when I lean into connection, it's going to feel so much better. So when we're in when we're in a fear-based emotion, we lose sight, we lose remembrance that we are all connected and that we all crave connection. And your role as the PIO part of your role is to remember that. And you have that to your advantage because no matter what, people are craving to feel validated, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel connected, to belong. And not to belong artificially, but to belong for the core of who they are. And that is that love-based frequency. And you get to remember that. The other thing that I'll bring in is when I talk about stability and safety and being in alignment with, our in coherence and in a regulated nervous system, because we're wired for connection, we are co-regulating beings. This means that every single nervous system, all the time, is constantly seeking regulation. That's why we shiver when we're cold. It's our body trying to create friction to re-regulate our system because it's cold, it's out of balance, it's dysregulated. There's this saying, I don't know who to credit it to, but there's this saying that says the most powerful person in the room is the most regulated person in the room. The reason for that is because every single body is craving regulation, and we co-regulate because we are connective beings. So if you walk into the room and there is fear and doubt and anxiety and grief and all of these fear-based emotions that you're meeting, right, that are there, that are present, and you walk in and you are grounded and you feel safe in your body, there's tools and skills to ways to get there. And you're holding that vision of the better tomorrow that you are bringing people towards because you're leading and you're communicating through the crisis to get them there. And you're holding that vision and you believe in that vision and you know that you can meet the people in the room and you're going to stay in alignment, you're going to stay grounded in regulation. All of a sudden, when you walk into that room, and this also counts for on screen because energy doesn't have borders the way that our bodies do. All of a sudden, when you walk in with your presence, every dysregulated system in that room is unconsciously seeking regulation. Regulation wins, just like the highest frequency wins. Both go together. You can't be in a fear-based emotion and be regulated. Not this prefrontal cortex on and off at the same time. You can't do it. So all of a sudden, you walk into the room with that presence, with that resonance, and before you even open your mouth to speak, every body, every single body, begins to feel safer, right? And maybe not completely safe, but they're going, oh, something shifted. I'm now feeling maybe a little bit more calm, maybe a little bit safer, maybe a little bit, just leveling up a little bit on that scale of emotionality. And they don't know necessarily how to articulate it because our society hasn't been taught these things. But all of a sudden, their system unconsciously knows that you are the regulator. And all of a sudden, there's this unconscious felt sense of trust and credibility that you possess as the leader who just walked in the room because you are regulated. All of this goes together. And so if you guys have questions, we'll take them. But I do want to make sure that I ask that big question at the beginning is how do you meet the resistance, right? A lot of what I've shared is how. One, you make sure that you are in regulation. There are breathing techniques to help you drop right in. I host every single morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. I host a morning live for 30 minutes where I share one truth, one piece of nugget of this, and then I take you through a drop-in that helps you regulate your nervous system so that you can tap into all of these things. So it's free. Every single morning, Monday through Friday, I am there, I am live, I am doing this. It's my gift. Because I believe that if we had a world of leaders who knew this stuff, their world would be a far better place. So part of that is making sure, and my students are they're running for Congress, and they're in some serious positions. And they come back after just a few weeks of working with me and they'll say, I was in a meeting. That's a client or a student just said this to me the other day. I was in a meeting and I could feel the tension in the meeting. I wasn't the one leading the meeting, she said, but I was feeling the tension rise. And so because she wasn't leading, she had the chance to just sit and start regulating her nervous system. And all of a sudden the shift in the room happened and people started to feel calmer and there was more cohesion in the room, and they ended up getting to where they needed to get to together as a unit rather than what was starting to bubble up and escalate. So the power of this stuff, when you are meeting resistance, first it starts with you. How grounded and safe, and when I say safe, part of your job as a PIO in crisis comms is to create safety, right? Is to help people feel safe in chaos, safe through chaos. Safety is 4 layers deep. It's physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's energetic. And that energetic part is what I'm talking about. It's that sense of, why does this person make me feel so calm and so grounded and so safe? Why? It's because that person is calm, grounded, and safe in their own body. So it's a skill that you can hone first and foremost. Then, when you're meeting resistance, the biggest thing that I want to share with you, and the reason for all of this today, is to remember that if somebody is resisting, it's because there's a part of them that feels unsafe, therefore in fear, and their ego is trying to keep them alive. It can feel like, I'll share this. I used to really struggle with feeling safe, like nervous system safe, when somebody hurt me, like hurt my feelings, right? Really deeply hurt me, especially if that person was somebody who was close to me, because otherwise they didn't have power, like nobody had power to hurt me. So it was a big thing. And I'm in a relationship now, we're getting married in June. So this is like 5 years ago, we're at the start of our relationship. And Aaron, my fiance now, did something that hurt me. He didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't malicious, but I got hurt. And I remember sitting with him at the counter in our kitchen, and I was trying so hard to articulate what it was that hurt me. And as much as I wanted to, the words would not, it was like they would just stick right at my throat. They couldn't come out. And he took my hand and he said, what do you think is going to happen after you tell me this? And in that moment, I heard a voice that said, a fate worse than death. So my point in saying that is, when I say it's their nervous system or their ego keeping them safe, is because oftentimes, due to our traumas, due to our life experiences, we have belief systems, we have triggers, we have traumas, unhealed wounds that actually tell us that if I do this, or if I expose myself in this way, or if I lean into this thing that feels so vulnerable and therefore so unsafe, even if it's not cognitively like rational, the nervous system can say a fate worse than death awaits. And your job in your role is to understand that when you're being met with resistance, and we can talk about resistance of communities as a whole, like that's the macro of the micro, but if you're talking about convincing or getting an elected official to like learn these skills so that they could do a better job and support you and give you the buy-in support that you guys need, so when it's more one-on-one and you're being met with this resistance, regulate yourself. And remember, the way that I like to see it is, I picture that person as a child, because there is a child in them that's frightened. And what that does for me is it opens up my heart and it allows me to have compassion. And when I say that every fear-based emotion has a need that's longing to be met, you can actually like teach yourself these things. You can understand, like I've just taught you about fear. Grief. Grief is a combination of 3 things: feeling of loss, deep loss, feeling of lost, and feeling of longing. So when somebody is grieving, they have this intense overload of feeling a great loss, right? They've lost something. They are longing for it to come back, and they're realizing that it's never going to be. And they are so lost because they have no idea what tomorrow looks like. That's what the research tells us about grief. So the needs of grief are, how do you meet that loss, longing, and lost in your communications, in your leadership? Right? So understanding that every fear-based emotion has a need that's longing to be met, and how do you, with a regulated nervous system, create safety to meet that need. And to when it's really challenging, when somebody's being really blah, right? Remembering that there's a part of them that feels unsafe, and then tackling that, going there with them. Does that make sense? Is this helpful? Okay. Do you guys have questions? I'm officially stepping off my soapbox.
Could you give us some specific examples of when somebody's in fear and you can see them as a child? What do you say? What's next?
Okay, so attunement. I talked this morning on my morning live. I talked about attunement. Do you guys know what attunement is? Attunement. Attunement is, for lack of a better way of saying it right now, attunement is being able to tap into the deeper wisdoms of the body. And what happens when we are attuned to self, attuned to infinite wisdom, whatever name you want to give that, and attuned to others, you start to receive those actual answers. So the best answer that I can give you is, my pup is joining us, is to trust your instincts. Because here's why. If you're in a room and somebody's in resistance, which means they're in fear, and you're recognizing that, and you're going, okay, this is really challenging. How am I actually going to convince this person or influence this person to do what they need to do in order to serve you guys, to support you guys, but also ultimately to protect and to serve the community, right? That's your role. All good, Robert, thank you. If you can recognize that their system is in fear, then what you're doing, without kind of realizing it sometimes, is you're actually opening up your heart. So if I can tell myself, instead of being like allowing it to trigger me, for example, I'm in a conversation and I'm being met with resistance, guys, I talk about this stuff on stage and I trigger people just by nature of this conversation, because not everybody is ready or open for this conversation. And I've literally had people stand up when I'm keynoting and yell at me. I didn't do anything in that moment except say something that triggered their ego, right? That triggered maybe they felt like I was telling them that they've been doing it all wrong their whole career, which is never my intention, right? But so in those moments, I'll just speak for myself, I could get activated and I could come back and push back. Or I've had somebody stand up, a very powerful leader stand up in a room full of very powerful leaders, go, you people don't know what you're talking about, and like talk to me that way. And in that moment, I remember, this was a 2-hour-long presentation with a group of extremely powerful leaders in this country. And in that moment, I could have been like, yo, dude, you want to see what I've done? Like, you want to hear my accolades? You want to read my bio again? You want to know the tables that I've sat at, right? I could have met his ego with my ego. I could have like puffed up and gone after it. And instead, I stayed grounded. I remember in this particular experience, because this was the first time I was actually really successful at this, and this is the work, guys. This is the work. So I literally had this out-of-body experience where I went out of my body and I went, ooh, that was prickly. And I came back in and I just held firm, and I chose to see that person. I chose to see the fear that he was expressing to me in that moment. What I was doing was challenging everything that he's built his career on, and essentially telling him that there's another way, and that way is really scary, but hey, dude, you got to man up and lead and step into this, right? That's what he was hearing. That's not how I was positioning it, obviously, but that is what his system was hearing. And I could recognize that. So in that moment, there's also about 25 other leaders. I'm in the middle of a circle, and there's 25 other leaders sitting all around me. And I knew that I couldn't lose them. I couldn't lose my credibility with them. So I met that person with a little bit of what he said, and I was very attuned to listening to what was needed in the moment. And then throughout the rest of the presentation, this was about 20 minutes in, and it was 2 hours long. So throughout the rest of the presentation, I would continue on my way. I would continue with what I was doing. But every once in a while, I would just turn back to him and say, oh, and this refers to what you were mentioning of, and like proving with credibility, right? Proving, making the points through example. And about 15 minutes before the end of the presentation, he stood up again and he cut me off again. And he said, okay, Melissa, you have me convinced. And now he started asking actually beneficial questions. So my answer to you isn't like, here's what you do, step 1, step 2, step 3, here's how you answer, here's what you do. It is stay grounded in you before you walk into a conversation that's going to be challenging, that might trigger you in some way because you are human too, that might activate you in some way. Ground, breathe, tap in. And the more you can tap into your body, the more you're opening up those 2 other scientifically proven brains that you have innate access to. And that is energy. And then the more that you will be attuned, instead of getting defensive and closing those off, because when we're in a fear-based reaction, we do not have access. We are not in alignment. We're not in coherence. We're not grounded. So by choosing to stay rooted, to stay grounded, to stay open, to view that person, for me, it might be different for you, but for me, I can view that person as like, I can see why he's scared right now. I'm really challenging everything that he knows to be true. And that's scary. Like, and I'm asking him to brave up, right? In this new way. That's a big thing. I'm telling him that if he doesn't, he's going to fall behind because he's going to, right? So that's scary. So I can see the child that's scared. That's my way of doing it because that gives me loving compassion the way that I would for a child who's scared. And I stay in alignment and I go with what I feel. And that's attunement. That's not woo-woo. That's not, oh, I'm just going with what I feel in the moment. It is literally, I am listening to the information and the guidance that I am being given. And you can tell that spiritual. We could also prove it scientifically, right? I can go either way with you guys. So that's the work. And I remember the more I started to learn how to do this, sometimes I would be saying things and I would be thinking in my brain, I'd be thinking, I don't know why I'm saying this right now. But I had committed to learning this skill, to deepening this access. And I would literally be thinking, I don't know why I'm saying this right now. And I would say it. And then within minutes, often, people would come, the person I spoke to would come with tears in their eyes in gratitude, saying what you did, what you just said, changed everything. And then that builds the credibility with your own system, with your own connection to your own body. And over time, and one of the things I talked about in the live last week, I want to say, or this week, I don't know, but first we have to learn how to hear, right? So what does fear sound like to you? All of those things. First, we have to learn how to hear our body and what it's saying because most of us have been cut off at the neck to our access. And then we have to learn how to listen. And when we learn how to listen, our brain is going to tell us it doesn't make sense because in that moment, it doesn't necessarily logically make sense. But when we hear and we trust what we hear and we listen to it, all of a sudden you start to see all of the positive impacts and effects and results that you get to have, that you experience. And then over time, that brain stops second guessing what the heart and the gut are saying. But right now, you have decades of your brain winning and stopping you, hindrancing you. I know that's not proper English, but.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're so welcome. I know that I went on for a minute.
I've got 1 o'clock on the dot. I've got a couple of announcements. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know they probably all have full schedules the rest of the afternoon. So I am going to share my screen real quick. I do want to talk real quick about our upcoming webinar. Usually this webinar is the third Wednesday of the month, but Severe Weather Week is going to be March 1st through 7th. So I'm going to bump this webinar up to the first Tuesday in March, which would be March 3rd. And we are going to have a panel of 3 National Weather Service meteorologists from across Kentucky. One is in Eastern Kentucky, one is in Central Kentucky in Louisville, one is in Western Kentucky out in Paducah. And they are going to not teach you about weather. They're going to help you, show you the tools that they have and how you can better communicate to your communities about what is coming up in the weather. So it should be a really good panel. These are great people, great speakers. I work with them all the time. Really looking forward to it. Otherwise, I now have 102. So thank you for spending the extra time with us today. Melissa, it was great. A lot of stuff to think about. Really gonna put this one to use. Appreciate you taking your time. If there's anything you ever need, feel free to contact me. And for the rest of you, I hope to see you in March. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful.